In the hushed twilight of Willow Ridge Hollow, tucked away in the heart of the Smoky Mountains, 12-year-old Caleb Morrow gripped the tarnished key to his grandfather's forsaken cabin. The villagers of the small settlement had long murmured about Old Man Morrow and his ramshackle dwelling, perched high on a rocky slope. Those murmurs had now turned to open ridicule since the orphaned boy became its improbable heir. With no parents or kin to call his own, the crumbling cabin on the mountainside was his sole inheritance. Tears stung his eyes as he climbed the weed-choked trail, the townsfolk's jeers still echoing in his mind. He slid the rusty key into the lock, and the door groaned open, unveiling a dust-laden interior heavy with the scent of forgotten days and hidden truths. What could lie concealed within these rotting walls that his grandfather had guarded so fiercely? What secret could justify the old man's lifelong solitude? The stale air filled Caleb's lungs as he crossed the threshold. Dust motes swirled in the faint shafts of light piercing grimy windows. He stood still, absorbing the remnants of his grandfather's existence. A frayed armchair, sagging shelves lined with tattered books, a small wooden table paired with a single chair. The floorboards groaned under his weight as he ventured deeper inside. A week had passed since they'd laid Grandfather Morrow to rest. The funeral was thinly attended. Just Caleb, Miss Harper, his schoolteacher, old Mr. Tate from the Mercantile, and a few nosy onlookers. No one wept but Caleb. The whispers had trailed him even there. Asterisk, poor lad, stuck with nothing but that crumbling shack. Old Morrow was half mad, living up there alone. What'll become of the boy now? Asterisk. Caleb approached a small side table where a dust-coated photograph rested. He brushed it clean with his sleeve, revealing 3 figures, his parents, youthful and beaming, standing beside his grandfather. Behind them loomed an odd mechanical device, its wires and cogs glinting in what seemed to be a workshop. Caleb had no recollection of his parents, lost to him at age 2 in a flash flood that swept their car off a winding mountain road. His life with his grandfather was all he'd ever known. "You'll learn to stand on your own, lad," Grandfather had often said, his weathered hands guiding Caleb through chores around their simple home in the village. "The world owes you nothing, but it'll respect hard work and a keen mind." Grandfather had been strict, yet just teaching Caleb arithmetic and natural philosophy from a stack of aging textbooks instead of sending him to the local school. Only when the old man's health faltered 3 years ago had Caleb joined the other children in the single-room schoolhouse, where he found himself far ahead in some lessons and woefully behind in others. Now, at 12, he was alone with an inheritance no one coveted. The villagers had chuckled when Mr. Langston, the county attorney, read the will, bequeathing the mountain cabin and its contents to Caleb. Their modest village home had been leased, and the lease had lapsed. Whatever small savings grandfather had were consumed by doctor's bills in his final days. Caleb drifted to the kitchen corner, where a rusted iron stove stood cold and barren. The cupboards held a few cans, their labels peeling and faded. A kerosene lamp rested on the counter, still half-filled. At least he wouldn't face his first night in darkness. As dusk settled, the cabin grew dim. Caleb lit the lamp and pressed on with his exploration. In the small bedroom, a narrow cot bore a patchwork quilt grandfather had preserved from Caleb's infancy. Beside it sat a trunk, which, when opened, revealed neatly folded clothes too big for a boy but precious all the same. At the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, lay a leather-bound journal. Caleb carefully unwrapped it and turned to the first page. His grandfather's precise handwriting spilled across the faded paper. Asterisk, the work persists, despite their skepticism. I cannot risk bringing it to the village. Too many curious eyes, too many who'd misuse what they cannot grasp. The boy will inherit it all in time. Until then, I must safeguard what could reshape everything. Asterisk. Caleb leafed through pages brimming with sketches, complex equations, and cryptic passages that seemed written in code. Many entries referenced the legacy and the vault, but provided no clear explanation of either. The final entry, dated just 3 weeks before Grandfather Morrow's passing, read simply, "It is nearly finished." My time is running out, but the boy will complete what I could not. Exhaustion washed over Caleb. The emotional toll of the funeral, the move, and now these enigmatic discoveries left him spent. He set the journal carefully on the small table beside the cot and lay down, wrapping the familiar quilt around his shoulders. The wind howled through gaps in the walls, and in the distance, an owl hooted into the night. Despite the unfamiliarity of the cabin, there was a strange solace in being surrounded by his grandfather's belongings. He held the journal close to his chest as his eyelids grew heavy. Tomorrow, he would begin to decipher what his grandfather had left behind. Tomorrow, he might uncover why the old man had spent countless hours away from the village, in this remote cabin everyone deemed worthless. Tomorrow, perhaps, he would discover what legacy awaited him. As sleep overtook him, Caleb's final thought was of the odd machine in the photograph and the fierce pride in his grandfather's eyes as he stood before it. Morning sunlight poured through the grimy windows, jolting Caleb awake. Disoriented by his surroundings, he noticed the journal lying open on his chest, its pages bathed in a sunbeam. He sat up, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and studied the mysterious book more closely. The symbols scrawled across the pages were unlike anything he'd encountered. Circles overlapping triangles, numbers arranged in strange sequences, and diagrams depicting machinery beyond his comprehension. Some pages listed what seemed to be coordinates, while others contained lengthy passages in a cipher where letters were swapped with symbols. "You've got a knack for patterns," Caleb, his grandfather, had often said during their arithmetic lessons at the kitchen table. "See how the numbers weave together? There's harmony in mathematics if you learn to hear it." Those lessons echoed in his mind as he traced a finger along a sequence of numbers. 7, 11, 13, 17, 19, 23. Prime numbers arranged in a spiral on the page. Nearby, his grandfather had sketched what looked like the cabin itself, but with dotted lines extending beneath the foundation. Caleb set the journal aside and began a more thorough search of the cabin. In daylight, he noticed details missed the previous night. The floorboards near the small wood stove showed unusual scuff marks, as if something heavy had been dragged across them repeatedly. A section of the back wall was built with slightly different wood, its color subtly distinct to his keen eye. He ran his hands over the walls, feeling for irregularities. His grandfather had taught him to observe meticulously. "The world shares its secrets with those who look closely," he'd say, urging Caleb to study the intricacies of a spider's web or the structure of a frost pattern. The journal mentioned the vault repeatedly. Could there be a hidden room within or beneath the cabin? Caleb returned to the worn floorboards, kneeling to inspect them. Small grooves were carved into certain boards, not haphazardly, but in a pattern reminiscent of the journal's strange symbols. A knock at the door broke his focus. Caleb froze, unsure who would trek up the mountain trail to visit. After a brief pause, he opened the door to find Miss Harper, his teacher from the village school, holding a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "Good morning, Caleb," she said with a warm smile. "I thought you might need some supplies." She asked, "May I come in?" Caleb stepped aside, suddenly conscious of how disheveled both he and the cabin must look. Miss Harper entered, her gaze sweeping the dusty interior with a careful neutrality that Caleb appreciated. Unlike others in the village, she had never spoken ill of his grandfather. "I brought some bread, cheese, and jam," she said, setting the basket on the small table, "and some fresh apples from my orchard." Miss Harper's gaze settled on the open journal. "Your grandfather's notes?" Caleb nodded. "Did you know him well?" Miss Harper traced a finger along the spine of a book on a nearby shelf. "Better than most, I'd say." Before he turned so solitary, Ezra Morrow was known as quite the scholar. Some claimed he studied at a university out west before coming back to these mountains. She turned to Caleb. There were whispers he was an inventor of some note. An inventor? Caleb's mind flashed to the peculiar machine in the photograph. Yes, though he never spoke of it to me outright. But sometimes, when he came to the village for supplies, I'd spot papers peeking from his pockets, sketches like these. She nodded toward the journal. When I asked, he'd just smile and say he was building the future. She stayed only a little longer, promising to visit again in a few days and reminding him that the school year would start in 2 weeks. After she left, Caleb returned to the journal with fresh curiosity. One page showed a sketch of what seemed to be the cabin's floor plan, with an X marked in the corner farthest from the door. Caleb moved to that spot, inspecting the floorboards closely. They appeared ordinary, but when he leaned his weight on them, he felt a faint give, unlike the sturdy boards elsewhere. Another page displayed a ring of symbols, with one resembling an hourglass repeated at the cardinal points. That same symbol, he now noticed, was faintly carved into the four corners of the room, nearly invisible unless you knew to look. The pieces weren't yet clear, but Caleb was certain his grandfather had left these clues intentionally. As evening fell, he lit the kerosene lamp again and spread the journal pages across the floor, determined to unravel the message hidden in the cryptic symbols. His grandfather had believed he could grasp this legacy. He wouldn't let that trust go to waste. After 3 days of careful study, Caleb began to decipher his grandfather's enigmatic notes. The symbols weren't purely a code. Many represented electrical circuits and mechanical parts, drawn with alterations suggesting enhancements to known designs. The old man had been cataloging his inventions, using his own shorthand to shield his work. Caleb sat in his grandfather's tattered armchair, stretching his aching muscles after hours poring over the journal. Something about the chair felt off. The right armrest had a different heft than the left. He ran his fingers along the wooden frame, pressing lightly until he heard a faint click. A small panel popped open in the armrest, revealing a brass object inside. He carefully lifted out what looked like an antique compass, its surface etched with the same odd symbols from a journal. But this was no ordinary compass from his geography lessons. Instead of cardinal directions, the face bore the hourglass symbol he'd seen carved in the room's corners. When Caleb held the compass level in his palm, the needle spun wildly before settling on a direction that wasn't north, pointing straight at the back wall of the cabin. He crossed the room slowly, watching the needle shift, always aiming at the same wall section. As he neared the spot where the floorboards had yielded slightly, the needle began to quiver. "The vault," Caleb whispered, recalling his grandfather's journal entries. He knelt on the floor, compass in hand, watching the needle tremble more intensely the closer it got to the worn boards. He traced the edges of the boards with his fingers, searching for any irregularity. Near the wall, one board shifted slightly when pressed. Setting the compass aside, Caleb wedged his fingernails into the narrow gap and pulled. The floorboard lifted, revealing a dark space below. Heart racing, he grabbed the kerosene lamp and held it over the opening. Instead of dirt, as he'd expected, there was a small cavity holding a metal box about the size of a loaf of bread. The box was fastened with a combination lock featuring 3 dials, each marked with numbers from 1 to 20. Caleb carried the box to the table, placing it beside the open journal. The lock demanded the right sequence to open. He paged through the journal, hunting for number patterns that might unlock it. Several pages listed sets of 3 numbers, but which was the correct one? He recalled his grandfather's love for prime numbers, evident in many of the journal's calculations. One sequence appeared repeatedly: 7, 13, 19, all primes, each separated by 6. Caleb turned the dials to match these numbers, but the lock held fast. He tried other combinations from the journal, each failing. Growing frustrated, he returned to the early pages, reading more closely. On the 3rd page, in the top corner, was a small note he'd missed. "The vault protects what matters most. Remember your beginning, his beginning." Caleb pondered its meaning. His birthday was April 15th, so perhaps 4/15, but the lock needed 3 numbers. What else marked his beginning? Then he remembered his parents died when he was 2, in a flood on November 21st. Hands shaking slightly, he set the dials to 11, 2, 21. A soft click sounded, and the lock released. Before he could lift the lid, voices outside caught his ear. Through the grimy window, he saw 3 boys from the village climbing the path to the cabin. Leading them was Nathan Caldwell, the mayor's son, who delighted in making Caleb's school days wretched. Mad Morrow's place looks even worse up close, Nathan called to his friends, loud enough for Caleb to hear through the thin walls. Let's see what the orphan got. Probably just mold and spiderwebs. Caleb quickly returned the metal box to its hiding place under the floorboard, covering it with the loose plank. The compass he slipped into his pocket just as heavy footsteps thudded onto the porch. "Hey, orphan boy," Nathan yelled, pounding on the door. "We know you're in there. Come out and show us your grand inheritance." Caleb stayed silent, peering through a crack in the curtains as Nathan pressed his hands against the window, squinting inside. His face, warped by the distorted glass, twisted into a sneer. Not even a real house. Just a shack that'll collapse in the next storm. Nathan turned to his friends. "My dad says the old man was offered good money for this land, but he was too crazy to sell. Now this runt's stuck with it." They circled the cabin, rattling windows and laughing. Caleb held his breath, his hand gripping the compass in his pocket, until they finally grew bored and retreated down the mountain trail, their taunts fading. Only when they were gone did Caleb exhale. Whatever the metal box held, he knew instinctively it must be kept from curious eyes. Tonight, under cover of darkness to hide the lamp's glow from the village below, he would explore its contents and continue unraveling his grandfather's legacy. 4 days alone in the cabin had exhausted Caleb's limited food supplies. Miss Harper's basket had lasted longer than expected, but now necessity drove him to the village. He hid his grandfather's journal under a loose floorboard, pocketed the brass compass, and started down the winding mountain trail. Willow Ridge Hollow came into view as he rounded the final bend. A cluster of wooden buildings nestled in the valley, smoke rising from chimneys, the white spire of the small chapel peeking above the trees. Once this sight had brought comfort. Now, anxiety tightened his chest at the thought of facing the villagers' whispers. The bell above the mercantile's door jingled as Caleb stepped inside. Mr. Tate looked up from his ledger, adjusting his glasses as he recognized him. "Young Morrow," he said with a nod. "Wonder when you'd show up. Settling up there?" Caleb nodded, grateful for the shopkeeper's straightforward tone. He gathered essentials: flour, salt, beans, matches, items that would store well and sustain him. His grandfather had taught him frugality, a lesson now more vital than ever with his future so uncertain. As he placed his items on the counter, the door swung open. Mayor Caldwell entered, his broad frame filling the doorway, his son Nathan at his side, smirking wider upon spotting Caleb. "Tate," the mayor said gruffly. "The usual account, please." The shopkeeper nodded, turning to prepare the Caldwell's regular order. Mayor Caldwell's eyes landed on Caleb, his expression a calculated mix of pity and disdain. "Ah, the Morrow boy. Quite the inheritance you've got there, lad." His voice carried across the store, where other customers feigned disinterest. "That old cabin's been a blight on the mountainside for years," Mayor Caldwell said, pausing for effect. "Your grandfather was peculiar in his devotion to that place. Ezra Morrow wasn't one to let go of what he cherished." "Sir," Mr. Tate interjected softly as he packaged tobacco for the mayor. "Valued? That land's worth something, sure, but not with that rundown shack cluttering it." Mayor Caldwell chuckled. "My company offered your grandfather a decent sum, time and again. He could have lived easy in his final years instead of what, Roland?" Mr. Tate's voice carried a rare sharpness for the usually reserved shopkeeper. Instead of keeping his freedom, making his own choices, the mayor's face tightened. Instead of leaving his orphaned grandson penniless with nothing but a crumbling hovel, he turned to Caleb. "When you come to your senses, boy, my office is open. That land borders the northern mining tract. Caldwell Mining would still make you a fair offer." Nathan snickered. "Better sell fast, orphan, before it collapses on you." Caleb focused on counting his coins, ignoring the heat rising in his cheeks. The mayor gathered his purchases and left with a final pointed glance, Nathan trailing behind with a smirk that promised future trouble. Once they were gone, Mr. Tate sighed deeply. "Pay no mind to Roland Caldwell, lad. He's had his eye on your grandfather's land for years. Says there's minerals worth digging up. My grandfather never mentioned mining, Caleb said quietly. Ezra wasn't one to share his affairs. Mr. Tate agreed, then lowered his voice. But between us, your grandfather wasn't just some mountain recluse. The man had learning. Ideas, brilliant ones, some said. The shopkeeper vanished into the storeroom, returning with a cardboard box. Been keeping this safe. Your grandfather left it here about 2 years ago. Said if anything happened to him, it was for you when the time was right. He pushed the box across the counter. Figure now's as good a time as any. Caleb peeked inside, finding a stack of yellowed newspaper clippings, some over 20 years old. The top headline grabbed his attention. Morrow's invention promises breakthrough in energy technology. Below it, a grainy photo showed a younger Ezra Morrow standing proudly beside a machine resembling the one in the family photograph. There was a time Ezra Morrow was called the sharpest mind to come out of these mountains, Mr. Tate said. Then something changed. He pulled back, got secretive about his work. Some thought he'd failed, gone a bit off. Others, his shopkeeper tapped his temple. Others thought he'd found something worth guarding. Caleb carefully closed the box. Thank you, Mr. Tate. You take care up there, lad. And if you need anything at all, you come see old Tate here. With his supplies and the precious box of clippings, Caleb started back toward the mountain trail. He felt eyes on him as he passed through the village, some curious, some pitying, some scheming. Near the trailhead, he glanced back and saw a figure slip behind the feed store. Nathan Caldwell, no doubt plotting trouble. Clutching his parcels tighter, Caleb hurried up the mountain path, a new urgency in his steps. The newspaper clippings might hold clues to his grandfather's mysterious past. More importantly, they could explain why the mayor was so keen on a seemingly worthless plot of land, and what secrets truly lay hidden in his inheritance. Night had settled over the mountains by the time Caleb reached the cabin. After locking the door with the rough bolt his grandfather had crafted, he spread the newspaper clippings across the table, studying them under the lamplight. The article spanned nearly 2 decades, tracing Ezra Morrow's path from a promising young engineer to a solitary inventor. The earliest reports detailed his education at a renowned university and his early work designing efficient mechanical systems. Later pieces described controversial theories on sustainable energy that his peers had dismissed. The most recent clipping, from 15 years ago, announced that Morrow had retreated from public life to pursue his research alone after clashing with potential investors. Together, the articles painted a portrait of a brilliant but unyielding man who chose his mountain refuge over surrendering his inventions to those who might exploit them. Caleb felt a swell of pride mixed with urgency. If his grandfather's work was valuable enough to attract corporate interest, Mayor Caldwell's offhand offer to buy the land took on a darker tone. Stowing the clippings back in their box, Caleb retrieved the metal container from under the floorboard. The brass compass weighed heavily in his pocket as he placed the box on the table and lifted its lid. Inside was a mechanical device unlike anything he'd seen. A brass lever connected to an intricate network of gears and springs, mounted on a flat plate etched with strange symbols along its edge. Caleb carefully lifted the lever mechanism, inspecting it closely. The craftsmanship was impeccable, each part precisely machined and fitted. The plate's markings matched symbols from the journal, including the recurring hourglass. On the underside, his grandfather had engraved the key to what lies beneath. The compass in his pocket seemed to grow heavier. Caleb pulled it out and watched the needle point stubbornly toward the rear wall of the cabin. The same wall with the subtle difference in wood color he'd noticed days before. Heart racing, Caleb approached the wall, compass in one hand, lever mechanism in the other. The needle quivered more intensely as he neared the wall's center. On closer inspection, he found a nearly invisible seam running along one section. Pressing his hand against it, he felt a slight give, unlike the solid resistance of the rest of the wall. Examining further, Caleb spotted a small indentation matching the shape of the lever's mounting plate. Taking a deep breath, he aligned the mechanism with the recess, its markings lining up perfectly with the faint seams. As if made for this spot, the plate fit seamlessly. With trembling fingers, Caleb gripped the brass lever and pulled. A series of soft clicks sounded from within the wall, followed by a mechanical hum. Slowly, a section of the wall, about 3 feet wide and 5 feet tall, receded inward and slid aside, revealing a dark opening beyond. Cool air drifted out, carrying the scent of metal and oil. Caleb raised his lamp, its light illuminating a narrow staircase descending into the mountain itself. The steps, carved from stone and reinforced with metal braces, vanished into shadows beyond the lamp's glow. Copper pipes and bundles of wires ran along the walls, hinting at something intricate below. Summoning his courage, Caleb began the descent. The stairway stretched perhaps 20 feet down before opening into a space that took his breath away. His grandfather hadn't built a mere cabin on the mountainside. He had created a gateway to something extraordinary. The hidden vault was massive, at least 3 times the size of the cabin above. Workbenches lined the walls, strewn with tools, components, and partially assembled devices. Glass-fronted cabinets held notebooks, technical sketches, and material samples. At the center stood a large machine, partially draped in a canvas tarp, its exposed parts gleaming with brass, copper, and steel, crafted into an intricate assembly. Caleb ventured deeper into the vault, lamp held aloft. The space showed signs of recent use, tools neatly arranged, a chair pulled back from a workbench, as if his grandfather had only just stepped away. On the main workbench lay a set of blueprints anchored by small metal components. The top sheet bore the title Morrow Atmospheric Energy Converter, Final Design Specifications. As he leaned closer to study the blueprints, the lamp's flame flickered, stirred by a faint draft weaving through the chamber. Caleb froze, straining to listen. From above came the distinct creak of the cabin's door opening, followed by the groan of floorboards under an unfamiliar step. Someone had entered the cabin. Caleb quickly dimmed the lamp, casting the hidden vault into near darkness. The footsteps above continued, moving deliberately, searching. A male voice muttered something indistinct. Then, alarmingly, the steps near the rear wall where the hidden entrance stood open. Caleb pressed himself against the wall by the staircase, his heart pounding. A beam of light sliced through the darkness as a lantern illuminated the top of the stairs. Silhouetted against the glow from the cabin, a figure appeared in the doorway, the unmistakable outline of Nathan Caldwell, the mayor's son. "Morrow!" Nathan's voice echoed down the stairwell. "I know you're down there. I saw the light." Caleb stayed still, mind racing. The open workshop offered no hiding spots, no escape. Nathan's footsteps descended, his lantern's beam sweeping the space. "This is private property," Caleb called out, trying to sound bolder than he felt. "You're trespassing." Nathan reached the bottom, his lantern casting light across his face. Shock and fascination replaced his usual smirk as he took in the vast vault. "Holy," Nathan whispered, stepping further in. "Your crazy old grandpa carved this out of the mountain." "He wasn't crazy," Caleb said, stepping forward. "And you need to leave. Now." Nathan ignored him, drawn to the central machine with undisguised awe. "What is this thing? Some kind of generator?" "It's none of your business," Caleb snapped. "Your father wants this land. Now I see why." Nathan turned, his expression hardening. "My father doesn't know about this." "Not exactly." He hesitated. "He knows your grandfather was working on something valuable. Something about energy production. That's why he's been after this land for years." "To steal my grandfather's invention," Caleb said, bitterness in his voice. "To develop the resources," Nathan corrected, though doubt flickered across his face. "Look, I just came to see what you were hiding. My father told me to watch you, see if you found anything worth reporting." "So he could take it from me," Caleb shot back. Nathan didn't respond right away, his attention caught by the blueprints on the workbench. "Atmospheric energy converter," he read aloud. "This thing, it generates electricity from air." Despite himself, Caleb felt a spark of pride. "From atmospheric pressure, differentials, and thermal energy, according to my grandfather's notes. That would be revolutionary," Nathan said, his usual mocking tone gone. Do you have any idea what something like this would be worth? It's not about money, Caleb said firmly. My grandfather could have sold it years ago if that's what he wanted. Nathan circled the machine, studying it with surprising understanding. My father's mining company has been struggling since the main coal seam started running dry. That's why he's so set on grabbing new land. He glanced at Caleb. If this thing works, really works, it could make the mines obsolete. The realization hung between them. Mayor Caldwell's interest in the land might not be about claiming the invention, but about burying it to protect his business. You need to leave, Caleb said again, before you get ideas about telling your father. And if I don't? Nathan challenged, though his voice lacked its usual bite. You gonna make me, orphan boy against the mayor's son? Caleb reached for the brass lever he'd set on a nearby workbench. I'll seal this place up. My grandfather built it to stay hidden, Caleb said. I'm betting there's more than one way to keep it secure. Nathan looked doubtful, but hesitated to test the claim. His eyes roamed the vault, settling on a large roll of yellowed paper tucked into a tube on one wall. What's that? Caleb followed his gaze, realizing he hadn't noticed the tube during his initial exploration. Setting down his lamp, he carefully pulled out what turned out to be an old mining map, its edges brittle with age. Spread across a workbench, the map revealed a web of tunnels weaving through the mountain, many extending far beyond the boundaries of his grandfather's property. These must be the old copper mines, Nathan said, leaning in. They were abandoned decades ago when the veins ran out. My father's company has been planning to reopen some sections to hunt for missed deposits. Caleb noticed something odd. Several tunnels converged near the location of the hidden vault, including one that seemed to connect directly to it. His grandfather hadn't just built the workshop. He'd integrated existing mine tunnels into its design. There's a tunnel here, Caleb said, pointing to a passage marked with the familiar hourglass symbol. It looks like it leads right to this vault. Your grandfather was sharp, Nathan admitted. He built his laboratory with multiple escape routes. He studied the map further. Some of these tunnels run under my father's land, even under the whole village. An uneasy silence settled between them as the implications hit. If Mayor Caldwell learned of the hidden vault and its revolutionary invention, he'd stop at nothing to control it. You can't tell him, Caleb said firmly. Whatever's between us at school, this is bigger. Nathan seemed conflicted, ambition battling something else in his expression. What exactly are you going to do with this, Morrow? You're 12. You can't just build and sell a revolutionary energy device on your own. It was a fair question, one Caleb hadn't fully grappled with in the thrill of discovery. I don't know yet, he admitted, but my grandfather wanted me to find this. He left those clues for me, not for your father's company to exploit. Nathan fell silent, his gaze drifting from the massive machine to the sprawling workshop to the map with its network of escape routes. Finally, he sighed. Look, I won't tell my father. Not yet, anyway. But in return, I want to see how this thing works. I've been studying engineering in my spare time. Maybe I can help you figure it out. Caleb eyed him warily. Why would you help me? A complex expression crossed Nathan's face. Because my father has my whole life mapped out. Mine's the company, everything. But this, he gestured at the invention, this is actually worth something. It could be a trick, but Caleb saw genuine excitement in Nathan's eyes. And truthfully, he could use help unraveling his grandfather's intricate creation. Fine, Caleb said cautiously, but we set ground rules. First one, no one else knows about this place. Not your friends, not your father. No one. Nathan nodded, extending his hand. Deal. As they shook hands, Caleb wondered if he was making a grave mistake or gaining an unlikely ally in the most unexpected place. Dawn broke over the mountain as Caleb and Nathan cleared decades of dust from the vault. Their tentative alliance had held through the night, bolstered by shared awe at each new find. Behind the canvas tarp stood Ezra Morrow's masterpiece, a complex apparatus of copper coils, brass fittings, and crystalline components arranged in a design neither boy fully grasped. Your grandfather was a genius, Nathan admitted, wiping grime from a glass pressure gauge. This isn't just theory, he actually built it. Caleb nodded, carefully cleaning a control panel etched with his grandfather's distinctive symbols. But is it finished? And does it work? Nathan examined the central mechanism, where a small glass chamber housed what looked like a miniature version of the larger machine. I think this is a prototype, he said, a working model to test the concept. Caleb opened another of his grandfather's journals, found on a workshop shelf. Unlike the cryptic notebook he'd found upstairs, this journal contained clear technical documentation, including operational procedures for the prototype. "Listen to this," Caleb said, reading aloud. "The atmospheric differential converter successfully generated sustainable power for 72 consecutive hours in Trial 17, producing sufficient electricity for basic applications with zero fuel consumption." "He did it, Nathan," Caleb said. "He created an engine that runs on air pressure and temperature differences." Nathan let out a low whistle. "Do you realize what this could be worth? It could revolutionize energy production. No coal, no oil, minimal environmental impact." "Which explains these," Caleb said, opening a drawer filled with letters. The correspondence, spanning nearly a decade, included offers from energy companies, manufacturing firms, and even government agencies, all proposing partnerships, buyouts, or exclusive licensing deals. All had been firmly rejected. One letter caught Caleb's eye, dated just 6 months before his grandfather's death, on Caldwell Mining Company letterhead. Mayor Caldwell had offered $1 million for the property, no questions asked about any research materials found there. Nathan read it over Caleb's shoulder, his face darkening. "My father never mentioned offering that much. He just said your grandfather was stubborn about selling worthless land." "Worthless?" Caleb gestured around the vault. He knew, maybe not exactly what was here, but enough to make that kind of offer. They continued sorting through documents, uncovering patents for earlier inventions, scientific papers, and personal letters. One from Caleb's father, written shortly before his parents' fatal accident, revealed he'd been assisting with the project, believing in his father's vision of energy independence for all, not just those who could afford to exploit scarce resources. "Your grandfather turned down millions," Nathan said, scanning another rejected offer. "Why?" Caleb reflected as he studied his grandfather's notes. "He writes here about power belonging to the people. I think he feared big companies would control the invention, restrict access, or price it out of reach for ordinary folks, like what happened with the electrical grid in rural areas." Nathan nodded. "My grandfather told me how these mountains didn't get electricity until decades after the cities, because companies saw no profit in running lines to remote places." As morning stretched into afternoon, they focused on the prototype. Following the journal's instructions, they checked connections, adjusted settings, and prepared for a test. "Are we sure about this?" Nathan asked, his hand hesitating over the main switch. "What if it blows up or something?" "My grandfather ran it successfully before," Caleb said, projecting more confidence than he felt. "According to his notes, the worst that'll happen is it doesn't generate power." Nathan nodded, took a deep breath, and flipped the switch. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a soft hum rose from the device, growing steadily in pitch. The glass chamber at the center glowed with a faint blue light as gauges sprang to life. A small bank of light bulbs connected to the output terminals slowly lit up, casting a warm glow across the vault. "It works," Caleb whispered, on his voice. "It really works." Nathan stared at the glowing bulbs, then at the machine, running on no visible fuel, yet producing steady power. "This changes everything, Morrow. Do you get that? This could make fossil fuels obsolete." "Which is exactly why my father would do anything to control it," came a voice from the stairway. Both boys spun to see Mayor Caldwell at the bottom of the stairs, flanked by 2 men in suits. His cold smile didn't reach his eyes as he surveyed the vault. "Nathan," he said with quiet disappointment, "I expected better from you." "Father," Nathan started, stepping forward. "You don't understand. This invention could transform the valley, create new jobs." "Jobs?" Mayor Caldwell laughed, devoid of warmth. "This would destroy jobs," Mayor Caldwell snapped. "What happens to every miner, every driver, every worker in our operation when energy comes from thin air. He turned to one of the suited men. Document everything. I want detailed photographs and measurements. This doesn't belong to you, Caleb said, finding his voice. My grandfather left it to me. The mayor regarded him with a mix of pity and scorn. Your grandfather was a selfish old fool who could have provided for you instead of chasing pipe dreams. He gestured around the vault. All this brilliance wasted in hiding. But no longer. As the men moved deeper into the vault, Caleb caught Nathan's eye and subtly nodded toward the prototype. Nathan gave a barely noticeable nod before addressing his father. How did you find this place? The mayor's smile was thin. You weren't exactly discreet, son. Did you think I wouldn't have someone watching the Morrow property? When my man reported you'd gone in and hadn't come out by morning, it wasn't hard to guess you'd found something worth seeing. While the mayor spoke, Nathan casually shifted closer to the prototype. In one quick motion, he disconnected a key component and slipped it into his pocket. The next morning, Caleb woke to sunlight filtering through the cabin's grimy windows. For a moment, the previous day's events felt like a dream. The working prototype, Mayor Caldwell's intrusion, the tense confrontation that followed. But reality was stark. The mayor had given him 48 hours to consider a generous offer before returning with county officials to inspect the property for safety violations. Nathan had been ordered home, his betrayed expression lingering in Caleb's mind as the mayor practically dragged him up the stairs. Before leaving, Nathan had whispered, I took the activation crystal. They can photograph all they want, but it won't work without it. Now Caleb sat at the small table, a mug of weak tea cooling between his hands. Nathan had promised to return today to help devise a plan, but doubt crept in. Could he truly trust the mayor's son? Or had yesterday's alliance been a ploy to access the vault? By noon, Nathan still hadn't appeared. Caleb descended to the vault alone, taking stock of what remained. The mayor's men had photographed everything but taken nothing. Yet, the prototype sat dark and silent, its central chamber empty where Nathan had removed the critical component. Caleb dove into his grandfather's notes, seeking to grasp the invention's full potential. The atmospheric energy converter wasn't just for small-scale power. The full design could potentially supply an entire town using only natural temperature and pressure differences. No pollution, no fuel costs, no resource depletion. Just clean, renewable energy accessible to all. No wonder his grandfather had been so guarded. In the wrong hands, this technology could be suppressed, monopolized, or worse. In the right hands, it could transform lives, especially in remote places like Willow Ridge Hollow, where resources were scarce and poverty common. As afternoon faded into evening with no sign of Nathan, Caleb faced the reality that help might not come. He needed another ally, someone versed in local laws who could help shield his inheritance from the mayor's schemes. Just as he prepared to lock up and seek out Miss Harper, footsteps sounded on the porch. The door opened, revealing not Nathan, but one of the suited men from yesterday, introduced by the mayor as Mr. Langley, the company lawyer. Mr. Morrow, Langley said formally, as if addressing an adult rather than a 12-year-old. I've brought paperwork for your review. Mayor Caldwell is prepared to offer $50,000 for the property, a generous sum, given your circumstances. My grandfather was offered $1 million. Caleb shot back, catching the lawyer off guard. It's in writing. Langley recovered quickly. That offer was based on assumptions about what your grandfather had. Now that we've assessed the actual value, you mean now that you think you could take it by force for less? Caleb interrupted. The invention works. You saw it. I saw an interesting science project, Langley countered smoothly. But without proper documentation, patents, or proof of practical application at scale, its commercial value is speculative at best. He placed a folder on the table. Consider the offer carefully. A boy in your position, with no parents and limited resources, would be wise to secure his future. After Langley left, Caleb opened the folder. The contract inside was dense with legal jargon he barely understood, but its intent was clear. In exchange for $50,000, he would transfer all rights to the property and any intellectual assets found there to Caldwell Mining Company. As night fell, Caleb finally heard the approach he'd been waiting for. Quick, light footsteps he recognized as Nathan's. But when the boy entered, his usual bravado was gone, replaced by a mix of defiance and shame. "You said you'd come earlier," Caleb said, unable to keep the accusation from his voice. "My father had me followed," Nathan replied. "I couldn't get away until now." He reached into his pocket, then hesitated. "Caleb, I need to tell you something." The use of his first name, not Morrow or Orphaned boy, sent a chill through Caleb's mind. "My father, he's not just after the land. He's known about your grandfather's work for years. There's a mineral deposit under this mountain, a rare crystal formation, the same kind used in your grandfather's invention. The activation component," Caleb realized. "That's why it works here on this mountain." Nathan nodded grimly. "My father's company has been trying to extract it quietly through legal means, but your grandfather's property sits right above the richest vein." He took a deep breath. "I didn't know all this yesterday. My father explained everything last night, how the mining could bring prosperity to the valley, how your grandfather's invention threatens not just his company, but the livelihoods of everyone who depends on it." A cold dread settled in Caleb's stomach. "You're taking his side." "I'm trying to see both sides," Nathan insisted. "My father made strong arguments. This town's been struggling since the main mines closed. People need jobs, Caleb, and they could have them with my grandfather's invention, clean energy production, manufacturing," Caleb countered. "Years from now, maybe," Nathan said, looking torn. "After testing, certification, investment. My father's operation could start within months. People can't wait years for theoretical benefits." Caleb stared at his former ally, realization dawning. "You're not here to help me. You're here to convince me to sell." Nathan pulled the crystal component from his pocket and set on the table. "I brought this back. It belongs to you. But yes, I think you should consider my father's offer. And if I don't," Nathan's expression hardened, "he'll get the land one way or another. By purchase, by condemning the property as unsafe, by challenging your right to live here alone as a minor, or through tax liens when you can't pay the property taxes." He sighed. "You're 12, Caleb. You can't win this fight." As Nathan turned to leave, Caleb noticed something off about the crystal. Its color seemed muted, its structure slightly altered for what he remembered. He picked it up, examining it closely. "This isn't the original component," he said quietly. Nathan paused at the door, not turning back. "I don't know what you mean. This is a replica. A good one, but not the same. The original had a flaw, a small inclusion on the left facet." Caleb's voice hardened. "You kept the real one, where your father has it." Nathan's shoulders slumped slightly. "I'm sorry, Caleb. I really am." He opened the door. "Consider the offer, please." After Nathan left, Caleb sat in stunned silence, betrayal burning in his chest. Not only had he lost his only ally, but now the mayor likely held a critical piece of his grandfather's invention, perhaps enough to reverse engineer the technology while cutting Caleb out entirely. Caleb woke before dawn, a plan taking shape in his mind. He couldn't fight the mayor alone. He needed allies, information, and leverage. Most of all, he needed to understand why his grandfather had chosen this specific mountain for his vault and what made the crystals here so unique. As dawn broke over Willow Ridge Hollow, Caleb hurried down the mountain trail toward the schoolhouse. If anyone knew the valley's history, it would be Miss Harper, whose family had deep roots in the region. The schoolhouse stood quiet in the summer stillness, but a faint wisp of smoke from the chimney hinted that Miss Harper was already preparing for the upcoming term. She answered his knock with surprise that quickly turned to concern. "Caleb, are you all right? You look exhausted." "I need your help, Miss Harper," he said, words spilling out. "It's about my grandfather's property. Mayor Caldwell is trying to take it, and I don't understand why it's so important to him." Her expression tightened slightly. "You'd better come in." She ushered him inside, where neat stacks of papers and textbooks lined the desks. "I've heard whispers that Roland Caldwell visited your grandfather's property. Small towns talk. He found something my grandfather built. Something important," Caleb said, hesitating over how much to reveal. "And now he's trying to force me to sell the land." Miss Harper studied him for a long moment. "There's something you should see," she said finally. something that might explain why that mountain is so valuable. She led him to a locked cabinet at the back of the schoolroom and pulled out a large leather-bound volume, the town's historical record from its founding. "Your family's history here goes back further than most realize," she said, carefully turning yellowed pages. The Morrow name appeared in the first census of Willow Ridge Hollow. She pointed to a map of the original settlement, with property boundaries clearly marked. To Caleb's surprise, the Morrow family's land grant included not only the mountain where his grandfather's cabin stood, but also a large portion of what was now Caldwell Mining Company property. "Your ancestors were among the founders of Willow Ridge Hollow," Miss Harper explained. "They were granted mineral rights in perpetuity, a legal term meaning forever, as part of the original settlement charter. But the Caldwells own the mines now," Caleb said, puzzled. "Much of the land was sold off during tough times," she replied. "But according to these records," she turned to a legal document tucked between the pages, "your grandfather retained certain rights even after selling parts of the original grant. Specifically, rights to any unique or previously undocumented mineral deposits found on or beneath the remaining Morrow property." Realization hit Caleb. "So if there's something valuable under my grandfather's land, the Caldwells can't mine it without my permission, even if their tunnels could reach it from nearby properties." She closed the book. "Mineral rights are complex, Caleb, but they're legally binding. Your grandfather knew this. I suspect that's why he refused to sell, no matter the price. But the mayor said he'll condemn the property as unsafe if I don't sell," Caleb said. "He might try," Miss Harper acknowledged. "But condemnation requires due process. It can't happen overnight, especially with historic properties." They spent the next hour poring over town records, piecing together the valley's economic past. Willow Ridge Hollow had once thrived, first as a copper mining community, then as a lumber hub. But as resources dwindled, so did opportunities. The discovery of coal had briefly revived the economy, but those seams were now nearly exhausted. "Most young people leave after high school," Miss Harper said sadly. "There's little to keep them here. Caldwell Mining Company employs nearly 40% of the town's working adults. When those mines close, the town dies. Unless something changes," Caleb said quietly. "Unless a new opportunity comes along." She gave him a knowing look. "Your grandfather was working on something important, wasn't he? Something that could make a difference." Caleb nodded slowly. "An invention that generates power without fuel. Clean energy from the atmosphere itself." Her eyes widened. "That's what Roland Caldwell is after. Not just the land or minerals, but the invention too." "Both," Caleb agreed. "I think there are special crystals under the mountain that make the invention work," Caleb said. "The mayor wants to mine them, but he also wants to control the technology." Miss Harper's expression hardened with determination. "Then we need to ensure he doesn't succeed." She pulled out a newer ledger containing minutes from recent town council meetings. "Look here. 3 months ago, Mayor Caldwell proposed an ordinance allowing expedited mining permits for strategic resource development. It passed with little debate." She flipped forward several pages. "And here, just last month, a motion to declare certain older properties hazardous, subject to immediate demolition. Your grandfather was still alive then, but very ill. He was planning this," Caleb realized, "waiting for my grandfather to die, then using these new rules to take the property. Politics is often about patience," Miss Harper said grimly. "Roland Caldwell has been mayor for 15 years. He knows how to play the long game." As they continued researching, a pattern emerged. Subtle legal maneuvers by the mayor, all seemingly designed to clear obstacles to acquiring the Morrow property. But the historical mineral rights remain a barrier he couldn't easily overcome. "The town council meets tomorrow evening," Miss Harper said. "I suspect the mayor will push some measure related to your property. We should be there." "But what can I do?" Caleb asked. "I'm just a kid." "You're the legal heir to the Morrow property and all it contains," she corrected. "And more importantly, you're the keeper of your grandfather's vision, a vision that could save this town in ways Roland Caldwell can't imagine." As Caleb prepared to leave, Miss Harper handed him a small, worn book titled Mineral Formations of the Smoky Mountains. She had marked a page describing rare piezoelectric crystal formations found in certain isolated locations. Crystals that could convert physical pressure into electrical energy. Your grandfather wasn't the first Moro to recognize the mountain's true value, she said. But he might have been the first to fully understand how to harness it. I won't lie to you, son, Mr. Tate said, pouring coffee for Miss Harper and a glass of lemonade for Caleb. They sat in the back room of his mercantile, where the old shopkeeper had listened intently to their findings. Going up against Roland Caldwell is like wrestling a bear. That man's had his fingers in every pie in this valley for 15 years. But you knew my grandfather, Caleb pressed. You knew he was working on something important. Mr. Tate nodded slowly. Ezra Morrow was the smartest man I ever met. Folks around here thought he went odd, living up on that mountain alone. But those of us who knew him saw he was just focused. He set down his mug. What exactly did he build up there? Caleb described the vault and the atmospheric energy converter, watching the old man's eyes widen with understanding. Clean energy from thin air, Mr. Tate whispered. No wonder he kept it secret. He turned to Miss Harper. And you say the Morrow family still holds the original mineral rights, according to town records? Yes, she confirmed. Any unique mineral deposits on or below the remaining Morrow property belong to Caleb, no matter who owns adjacent lands. Which means Roland can't legally mine the crystals without Caleb's permission, Mr. Tate concluded. But that won't stop him from trying to find a loophole or from condemning the property. He's already threatened to declare the cabin unsafe, Caleb added. Mr. Tate stroked his chin thoughtfully. We could fix that part at least. I've got lumber and supplies. A few of us old-timers could shore up that cabin, make it solid as a rock. Roland would have a harder time calling it unsafe if it clearly isn't. Who else might help? Miss Harper asked. Frank Larson at the hardware store, Mr. Tate said. His son can't find work since the lumber mill closed. And old Doc Bennett. He treated your grandfather, Caleb. Respected him greatly. Mr. Tate counted on his fingers. The Thompsons, the Grays, more folks than you might think have reason to resent Caldwell's grip on this town. By sundown, Caleb was surrounded by a small but resolute group of townsfolk at his grandfather's cabin. Frank Larson arrived with his truck loaded with lumber and tools. Doc Bennett, despite his years, examined the structure with a practiced eye, pinpointing areas needing reinforcement. The Thompson brothers, former construction workers now intermittently employed by Caldwell Mining, brought their skills and strength. My grandfather would be thankful, Caleb told them as they worked into the evening, replacing rotted boards, bolstering walls, and patching the roof. He wanted his invention to help people, not just make money. Ezra was always a man of principle, Doc Bennett said, handing nails to Frank Larson as he secured a new support beam. Treated patients whether they could pay or not. Brilliant mind, big heart. As the repairs progressed, Caleb noticed the crew's growing curiosity about what lay inside the cabin. He had locked the hidden entrance to the vault, but questions about his grandfather's invention persisted. It's not just talk, is it? Frank Larson asked during a water break. Ezra really built something that generates power without fuel? Caleb nodded. I've seen it work. A small version. Anyway, he was building a larger one that could power much more. Power's costly up here, Frank said thoughtfully. My son's trying to start a carpentry business, but the equipment's electricity costs are too high for what he can manage. Something like that could change things for folks scraping by. Similar stories surfaced throughout the evening. Struggles to afford heating during harsh mountain winters. Businesses unable to grow due to energy costs. Young people leaving the valley for opportunities elsewhere. This isn't just about your property, lad, Mr. Tate said quietly as they watched the others work. It's about the future of Willow Ridge Hollow itself. By morning, the transformation was striking. The once ramshackle cabin stood sturdy and secure, with a new front porch, reinforced walls, and a roof that could withstand the heaviest rain. Mayor Caldwell would find it far harder to condemn on sight. As the impromptu work crew prepared to leave, Frank Larson handed Caleb an unexpected gift, a petition signed by everyone present. We, the undersigned, Caleb read aloud, support the preservation of the Morrow property as a historical site of scientific significance, and oppose any effort to seize or condemn said property against the owner's wishes. We'll gather more signatures in town, Frank explained. Not everyone will sign. Too many rely on Caldwell for their living, but enough might to get the county commissioner's attention. Their small victory was short-lived. As the last helpers headed down the mountain trail, Nathan appeared, his expression grim. "I came to warn you," he said, avoiding Caleb's eyes. "My father's furious about the repairs. He's called an emergency town council meeting for tonight instead of tomorrow. He's pushing a resolution to declare this whole area unstable due to old mine tunnels beneath it." "That's not true," Caleb protested. "The tunnels are solid. Your father's company still uses some of them." "He's presenting geological surveys that claim otherwise," Nathan said, finally meeting Caleb's gaze. "Look, I'm still not sure whose side I'm on, but you deserve to know what you're up against. My father's cut off your utilities, claiming non-payment, though I know that's a lie. He's trying to make it impossible for you to stay here." "Why tell me this?" Caleb asked warily. Nathan hesitated, because what he's doing doesn't feel right, even if his reasons make sense to him. He started down the trail, then turned back. "The meeting's at 7 o'clock. If you're going to fight this, that's where it starts." After Nathan left, Caleb rushed inside to check the hidden entrance. The vault remained undisturbed, but Nathan's warning rattled him. The mayor was escalating, moving faster than they'd expected. He needed to reach Miss Harper and the others immediately. And before the council meeting that night, he needed proof. Undeniable evidence that his grandfather's invention worked and could benefit the entire town. Otherwise, Mayor Caldwell's promises of mining jobs and quick economic gains would sway even those sympathetic to Caleb's cause. Caleb raced against time in the hidden vault, poring over his grandfather's notes for any hint of how to restart the prototype without the original activation crystal. The substitute Nathan had returned was useless, a similar-looking stone lacking the unique properties needed for the converter to function. The blue heart of the mountain, his grandfather had written repeatedly, the catalyst that bridges potential and kinetic energy. Without this critical component, the atmospheric converter was merely an intricate array of metal and wire. Impressive, but lifeless. Caleb carefully examined the empty chamber where the crystal had been housed. The fitting was precision-crafted for a specific size and shape. Notes in his grandfather's journal specified the original crystal was about 3 centimeters long with a distinct hexagonal structure. A soft knock echoed from above, the signal he and Miss Harper had arranged. Climbing the stairs, he found not only his teacher, but also Mr. Tate and Doc Bennett waiting in the cabin. "The meeting's been moved up to 6, Miss Harper said without preamble. "We have even less time than we thought. And Roland's been busy," Mr. Tate added grimly. "He's promising special tax breaks for businesses that support the mining expansion. Several folks who signed our petition this morning have already asked to have their names removed." "We need something undeniable," Doc Bennett said, leaning on his cane. "Something to counter Caldwell's promises of instant jobs and revenue." Caleb hesitated, then made a decision. These people had stood by him, risking the mayor's wrath to help. They deserved the truth. "There's something I need to show you," he said, leading them to the hidden entrance. Their gasps echoed in the stairwell as he revealed his grandfather's secret vault. "Good heavens," Doc Bennett whispered, moving slowly among the workbenches. "Ezra built all this." As they explored in awe, Caleb explained the atmospheric converter and how Mayor Caldwell had taken the crucial activation crystal. "Without it, I can't prove the invention works," he concluded. "And without proof, why would anyone choose an uncertain future over the mayor's promises?" Mr. Tate examined the prototype closely. "This crystal, you're sure it came from this mountain?" "My grandfather's notes are specific," Caleb said. "The formation is unique to this location. Something about the geological composition and pressure conditions. Blue crystals with a hexagonal structure," Doc Bennett mused. "Found in these mountains?" His eyes widened suddenly. "The blue caves." The others turned to him curiously. When I first came to Willow Ridge 50 years ago, the old copper mines were still active, the doctor explained. I treated a miner who described chambers deep in a mountain where blue crystals grew from the walls. Called them the Blue Caves, said they glowed faintly in the dark. Piezoelectric properties, Caleb said excitedly. They generate small electrical currents under pressure. That's what my grandfather's notes describe. The old mines were sealed when the copper ran out, Mr. Tate said. But Caldwell's company reopened some sections for coal operations. My father has the original crystal, came a voice from the stairway. Nathan stood there, slightly breathless. But I know where to find more. Caleb tensed. Why should we trust you? Nathan stepped fully into the vault. Because I've been thinking about what this invention could mean, not just for you or my father, but for everyone here. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket, a mining company map. My father doesn't know I took this. It shows the current mining operations and the old copper mine tunnels, including some that haven't been reopened. He spread the map on a workbench. A section was circled in red, marked geological anomaly, avoid blasting. That's the crystal formation, Nathan explained. My father's engineers found it 3 years ago during exploratory drilling. They've been trying to extract samples through narrow boreholes to avoid disturbing the surrounding rock structure. That's why they want to land, to access it directly from above, Nathan said. But can we reach it from existing tunnels? Caleb asked, studying the map. Nathan traced a route with his finger. This service tunnel comes within 50 meters of the formation. It's not in use now, but it should still be accessible. You're suggesting we enter the mines and extract a crystal ourselves? Miss Harper said, her tone conveying the danger of the idea. It's trespassing, Mr. Tate noted, and likely hazardous. It's our only chance, Caleb countered. Without a working crystal, we can't demonstrate the converter. Without a demonstration, no one will believe in its potential. I can get us in, Nathan offered. I know the guard schedules, the access codes. My father's been grooming me to take over the company someday. A bitter edge crept into his voice. I've spent more time in those mines than most of the workers. Why this change of heart? Doc Bennett asked bluntly. Nathan hesitated. Last night, my father told me his full plans, not just to mine the crystals, but to bury your grandfather's invention entirely. He looked at Caleb. He plans to buy the patents, then shelve them, ensure they never reach production. He called it protecting existing market structures. Protecting his profits, you mean? Mr. Tate growled. Hundreds of jobs depend on those profits, Nathan said defensively, then sighed. But yes, he's putting the company first, not what this technology could mean for people struggling with energy costs or for reducing environmental damage from mining. Caleb studied the map again. How hard would it be to reach this crystal formation? The main challenge is avoiding detection, Nathan replied. The tunnels are maintained for emergency access and ventilation. We need to enter after the evening shift change when the day crews leave, but before the night security patrols start. That gives us a window of less than an hour. Miss Harper calculated. Barely enough time to get in, find a suitable crystal, and get out. I'll go, Caleb said firmly. It's my grandfather's invention, my responsibility. You'll need help, Nathan insisted. I know the tunnels, the security systems. This is madness, Doc Bennett protested. Sending children into abandoned mines. Not abandoned, Nathan corrected. And used but maintained. And we don't have a choice. The council meeting is in 4 hours. Without proof this invention works, my father will convince everyone his mining operation is the only viable future for Willow Ridge. Reluctantly, the adults acknowledged the truth in his words. They spent the next hour devising a plan. Caleb and Nathan would enter the mine through a maintenance access point, while Miss Harper and the others rallied as many supportive townsfolk as possible for the council meeting. As Nathan outlined the route on the map, Caleb caught his eye. If this is another trick, it's not, Nathan said quietly. Some things are bigger than family loyalty. My father taught me business comes first, but he never considered I might decide his business model is outdated. He offered his hand. Partners. After a moment's hesitation, Caleb shook it. Partners. Twilight cast long shadows across the valley as Caleb and Nathan approached the abandoned maintenance entrance to the Caldwell mine, tucked in a secluded ravine overgrown with ferns and wild rhododendron. The steel door blended almost invisibly with the rocks and vegetation. Nathan produced a key from his pocket. "My father doesn't know I made a copy," he explained, working the rusted lock. "He gave me the original last year as part of my education in the family business." The door creaked open, revealing a narrow tunnel braced by timber beams. Nathan handed Caleb one of two miners' helmets he'd brought, its headlamp casting a thin beam into the encroaching darkness. "The main operations are 2 miles north," Nathan explained as they stepped inside. "This access tunnel connects to the older network from the copper mining days. Hardly anyone comes this way anymore." The air grew cooler as they descended, thick with the scent of damp earth and minerals. Their footsteps echoed eerily, the only sound besides the occasional drip of water from the tunnel ceiling. Caleb checked his watch. They had about 40 minutes before the night security sweep began. "Are you sure you know where we're going?" he whispered, his voice echoing loudly in the tight space. Nathan nodded, glancing at a small compass. "My father made sure I knew every corner of these mines. A Caldwell must understand the source of the family fortune," he always said. He led them to a junction where 3 tunnels split off. "This way, the old copper workings are through here." The tunnel they entered was narrower, with older, mineral-stained timber supports. As they moved deeper, Caleb noticed faint blue veins threading through the rock walls, traces of the crystal formation they sought. "We're getting close," Nathan murmured. "The main deposit should be just ahead." A deep rumble suddenly vibrated through the tunnel, sending dust and small pebbles raining down. Both boys froze. "What was that?" Caleb whispered. Nathan's face grew troubled. "Blasting? But there shouldn't be any operations in this section." Another, stronger rumble shook the tunnel. "Something's wrong. They're mining in a restricted area." They pressed forward urgently, the blue veins in the walls growing thicker and more numerous. The tunnel opened abruptly into a vast chamber where their headlamps revealed a breathtaking sight. The walls sparkled with thousands of blue crystals, some as small as a fingernail, others as large as a fist, pulsing faintly in the beams of their lights. "The blue caves," Caleb breathed, awestruck, echoing Doc Bennett's description. Nathan approached the nearest wall, studying the crystal formation. "My father's reports called them trace deposits. This is an entire vein." He turned to Caleb, his face a mix of wonder and betrayal. He lied about the extent of the formation. He's not after a few crystals for research. He wants to extract the whole deposit. Another blast rocked the chamber, closer now, sending a shower of small crystals clattering to the ground. A crack split one of the support beams. "They're blasting right into the formation," Nathan realized, alarmed. This whole section could collapse. Caleb quickly gathered several fallen crystals, searching for one with the hexagonal structure his grandfather's notes described. "We need to get out now." A larger tremor shook the chamber, and with a splintering crack, a main support beam fractured. Rocks and debris rained from the ceiling as the boys raced back toward the tunnel entrance. Just as they reached it, a massive rumble signaled a partial collapse, blocking their path with fallen rock. "We're trapped," Nathan shouted, panic creeping into his voice as he tried to shift the debris. Caleb forced himself to stay calm, recalling the mining map they'd studied. "Wait, your map showed old ventilation shafts connecting to my grandfather's property. One should be nearby." Nathan nodded, regaining his composure. "You're right. There's an auxiliary tunnel running parallel to this one." He swept his headlamp beam around the chamber until he spotted a narrow opening, nearly hidden behind a crystal-studded outcropping. They squeezed through into a lower, rougher tunnel that sloped gently upward. The blasting sounds faded as they hurried along, guided by Nathan's knowledge of the mine layout and Caleb's memory of his grandfather's map. After 20 minutes of tense navigation through increasingly unfamiliar passages, they reached a tunnel with fresher air and newer supports. "I know this section," Nathan said, relieved. "We're in the northern quadrant now, away from the blasting zone, but still inside the mountain." The tunnel led to a rusted metal ladder climbing into darkness. Above them, a circular hatch was set into the ceiling. "This must be an emergency exit," Nathan explained, testing the ladder's strength. "It should lead to the surface." The hatch resisted at first, its hinges stubborn from years of disuse. Both boys pushed with all their might until the hatch gave way with a screech of rusted metal. Cool night air poured in, fresh and clean after the musty mine. They emerged onto the mountainside, stars glittering in the clear sky above. Caleb oriented himself, spotting a familiar rock formation. "We're on my grandfather's property," he realized, his voice trailing off as understanding dawned. Counting his steps carefully, he moved about 50 yards upslope to a cluster of boulders. Behind them, hidden by undergrowth, was a small wooden door built seamlessly into the mountainside, an entrance his grandfather had camouflaged as part of the landscape. "Another way into the vault," Caleb whispered, pulling out the key that opened all the cabin's locks. The door swung inward, revealing a narrow passage sloping downward. Nathan stared in amazement. Your grandfather thought of everything. He built his vault with multiple escape routes. The passage led directly to the rear of the hidden laboratory. As they entered the familiar space, Caleb carefully examined the crystals he gathered. One stood out, matching the specifications in his grandfather's notes. A perfect hexagonal structure, roughly 3 centimeters long, with a faint blue luminescence of piezoelectric properties. "This is it," he said, holding it up to the light. "This should work in the prototype." Nathan checked his watch. "The council meeting starts in 30 minutes. If we hurry, we might make it." As they rushed to prepare the prototype for transport, a final, massive rumble shook the vault, the most violent yet. Tools clattered to the floor, and a fine dusting of debris sifted from the ceiling. "That wasn't controlled blasting," Nathan said, his voice tight with worry. "That felt like a cave-in." Caleb secured the crystal in its housing within the prototype. "Whatever's happening in the mines, we need to get to that meeting. This might be our only chance to show everyone what my grandfather created and what your father's willing to destroy to keep it secret." Caleb and Nathan burst out of the cabin, the portable prototype secured in a wooden crate between them, only to find a sheriff's deputy posting an official notice on the newly repaired door. "Condemning my property already?" Caleb demanded, breathless from their hurried ascent from the vault. The deputy turned, surprised. "Just serving notice, son. Property's being officially inspected tomorrow morning." He handed Caleb a document. "Emergency town council meeting tonight to review the situation." As the deputy headed down the mountain trail, Nathan examined the notice. "Preliminary condemnation pending safety inspection," he read. "My father's not wasting time." "We need to hurry," Caleb said, tucking the document into his pocket. They descended the trail as quickly as possible, carefully handling the crate with the prototype. The new crystal fit perfectly in its housing, but they hadn't had time to test if it worked like the original. What if it doesn't work? Nathan voiced the fear gnawing at Caleb's mind. "It has to," Caleb replied, with more confidence than he felt. "The formation matches exactly what my grandfather described." The town hall stood at the center of Willow Ridge Hollow, its white clapboard exterior glowing in the fading sunset. As they approached, they saw it was packed to capacity, with some townsfolk standing outside, listening through open windows. Miss Harper spotted them from the steps and hurried over. "Thank goodness you're here," she said, relief evident. "The mayor's already started his presentation. It's worse than we thought." Inside, Mayor Caldwell stood at the podium, pointing to a large geological survey map on an easel. Council members sat at a long table facing the audience, their faces a mix of concern and resignation. "Substantial risk of subsidence affecting the entire North Slope," the mayor was saying. "Our engineers have identified critical instabilities in the old copper mine tunnels running beneath the Morrow property." "Convenient timing," Mr. Tate muttered from a seat near the back, where Caleb, Nathan, and Miss Harper joined him. "Instabilities that were never mentioned before. Ezra wanted that land," Mayor Caldwell continued, his voice brimming with authority. "The proposed solution is twofold. First, immediate condemnation of the unsafe structure currently occupying the site. He paused, locking eyes with various audience members. And second, incorporation of the property into Caldwell Mining Company's stabilization project. A middle-aged woman raised her hand. What exactly does this stabilization project involve, Mayor? An excellent question, Mrs. Grayson, Caldwell replied, his practiced smile unwavering. Our engineers will implement a comprehensive approach, including reinforced concrete injections to secure tunnel integrity. As a secondary benefit, this process will allow safe extraction of certain mineral deposits that can create new jobs for our community. The crystals, Nathan whispered to Caleb. He's not mentioning them specifically. Another resident stood. What about the boy who owns the property? Seems he's fixed up that cabin real nice. Doesn't look unsafe to me. Appearances can be deceiving, Mr. Hawkins, the mayor said smoothly. The structural integrity of the building is secondary to the dangerous ground beneath it. Moreover, he added, his tone softening with feigned concern, we must consider whether a minor living alone in such a remote location is in the child's best interest. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Caleb felt a cold weight settle in his stomach as he grasped the mayor's strategy. Attack the property's safety, then question his ability to care for himself, potentially stripping him of control over his inheritance entirely. I've drafted an emergency measure, Mayor Caldwell continued, holding up a document, authorizing immediate action for public safety. All in favor. Point of order, Miss Harper called, standing abruptly. Public comment is required before any vote. The mayor's smile tightened. Of course, though I'd remind everyone this is a matter of public safety requiring urgent action. Then you won't mind hearing from the property owner himself, Miss Harper said, gesturing to Caleb. All eyes turned to the boy as he stood, battling the nerves threatening to overwhelm him. Nathan gave him an encouraging nod as they carefully brought the crated prototype forward. My name is Caleb Morrow, he began, his voice shaky at first but growing steadier. The property you're discussing belongs to me, left by my grandfather, Ezra Morrow. He took a deep breath. Mayor Caldwell isn't telling you the whole truth about why he wants this land. The mayor's face darkened. This is hardly appropriate. Let the boy speak, called Mr. Hawkins from the audience, echoed by several others. My grandfather wasn't just living as a hermit on that mountain, Caleb continued. He was working on an invention, something that could change everything for Willow Ridge Hollow. He and Nathan carefully set the crate on a table, something that could provide clean, affordable energy without mining or pollution. Skeptical murmurs mixed with curious whispers as Caleb and Nathan unpacked the prototype, revealing the brass and copper apparatus with its central crystal chamber. This device converts atmospheric pressure and temperature differentials into electrical energy, Caleb explained, reciting the technical description from his grandfather's notes. It requires no fuel, creates no pollution, and can operate continuously in almost any climate. Mayor Caldwell's dismissive laugh cut through the room. A perpetual motion machine? This is absurd. The boy's grandfather was known for his eccentric ideas. It's not perpetual motion, Nathan interjected, surprising many by opposing his father. It harnesses energy already present in the atmosphere. The science is sound. I've seen it work. The mayor's expression hardened as he addressed his son. Nathan, this childish rebellion has gone far enough. Return to your seat. Not until they see the truth, Nathan replied, standing firm beside Caleb. Caleb connected the final wires to the prototype. The audience watched with a mix of skepticism and curiosity as he made adjustments per his grandfather's specifications. The crystal in the central chamber caught the light, its blue facets glinting. That's what this is really about, Caleb said, pointing to the crystal. These rare formations exist beneath my grandfather's property. Mayor Caldwell doesn't care about safety. He wants to mine these crystals for profit while suppressing the technology my grandfather invented. Preposterous, the mayor sputtered, but a flicker of unease crossed his face as he recognized the crystal. Caleb reached for the activation switch, heart racing. Everything hinged on this moment. Proving his grandfather's invention worked, exposing the mayor's true motives, securing his inheritance. His hand hovered over the switch. What if the crystal wasn't quite right? What if some critical adjustment was missing from his grandfather's notes? What if, after everything, the prototype failed? Nathan seemed to sense his doubt. "It will work," he said quietly. "Your grandfather was a genius. Trust his design." Caleb took a deep breath and flipped the switch. For one agonizing moment, nothing happened. The prototype sat silent as the packed town hall held its breath. Mayor Caldwell's face began to shift from concern to triumph. Then a faint hum emanated from the device. The blue crystal in the central chamber glowed softly at first, then brighter. Gauges on the control panel flickered to life, and the copper coils around the crystal chamber took on a subtle blue luminescence. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Caleb connected a small array of light bulbs to the output terminals, and one by one, they lit up, casting a warm glow across the astonished faces of the council members. "It's generating electricity," Caleb explained, his voice steadying with growing confidence. "Not from fuel or batteries, but from the temperature and pressure differentials in the air itself. My grandfather called it the atmospheric energy converter." Nathan stepped forward. "I've seen the engineering principles. It's revolutionary technology. This prototype can power basic appliances, but a full-scale version could generate enough electricity for dozens of homes, maybe the entire town." The mayor recovered quickly. "A clever science project, sure, but hardly practical on any meaningful scale. The energy needs of a modern community could be met with larger versions," Caleb interrupted, drawing from his grandfather's notes. "This prototype generates about 500 watts. A unit the size of a small shed could produce 50 kilowatts, enough for several houses. A facility the size of this town hall could power all of Willow Ridge Hollow." An excited murmur spread through the crowd. Mr. Hawkins called out, "And it needs no fuel at all? No coal or gas?" "None," Caleb confirmed. "It runs continuously, drawing energy from natural atmospheric conditions. The only unique component is this." He pointed to the glowing crystal, a piezoelectric crystal formation found only in specific geological conditions, like those beneath my grandfather's property. Mayor Caldwell moved to regain control. "Even if this device works as claimed, which I'm not convinced it does, developing it into practical technology would take years. My company offers immediate jobs, tax revenue, community stability." "At what cost?" Miss Harper rose to her feet. "Continued environmental damage from mining, dependency on a single industry and a single company, and the suppression of an innovation that could transform our community's future." The mayor's expression hardened. "Let's be realistic. Caldwell Mining employs over 40% of this town's workforce. Would you risk those jobs for an unproven invention by a man known for his eccentricities?" A heavy silence fell as the reality sank in. No matter how impressive the demonstration, the immediate economic concerns weighed heavily on a community that had struggled for decades. Frank Larson, the hardware store owner, rose slowly. "My family's been in this valley for 4 generations. Watched it thrive with copper mining, decline when the veins ran dry, survive on lumber until that played out too. Now we cling to coal, knowing those seams are thinning every year." He gestured to the glowing prototype. "If this is real, if it works, it could be the first industry we've had that doesn't depend on tearing up our land. Something from the ground until there's nothing left," Frank Larson continued. "It's a child's inheritance," Mayor Caldwell countered dismissively. "Not an industrial development plan." "Then perhaps we should develop one," suggested Mrs. Grayson, the town librarian. "A community initiative to research and expand this technology, something that benefits everyone, not just Caldwell Mining." The mayor's face reddened. "The town lacks the resources for such an undertaking, and I remind the council we're here to address an urgent safety concern, not indulge in technological fantasies." About that safety concern, Nathan interjected, his voice firm despite his father's glare. "While retrieving a crystal sample tonight, Caleb and I witnessed unauthorized blasting in the restricted crystal formation area. The instabilities your engineers reported weren't pre-existing. They were caused by your own mining operations. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. The mayor's composure faltered briefly before he regained control. That's a serious accusation, Nathan. One you cannot substantiate. Actually, he can, came a new voice from the back of the hall. All heads turned to see a man in a dust-covered uniform, identifying himself as a mine safety inspector. Brent Larson, County Mine Safety Commission. We received reports of unauthorized blasting and were conducting an inspection when I encountered a significant collapse in the north section, exactly where mining is prohibited due to proximity to the crystal formation. The inspector approached the council table, placing a thick folder before them. My preliminary findings indicate willful violation of safety protocols, endangering workers and surrounding properties. I've ordered all operations suspended pending a full investigation. Mayor Caldwell's face went ashen. This is absurd. You've exceeded your authority. 3 miners were injured in tonight's collapse. Roland, the inspector cut in sharply. It could have been much worse. This isn't about property rights anymore. It's about criminal negligence. The revelation sent shockwaves through the audience. Council members huddled, whispering urgently. Through it all, the prototype hummed steadily, its lights glowing with unwavering brightness, a tangible symbol of an alternative future. Councilwoman Elaine Thornton, who had been silent until now, addressed Caleb directly. Young man, what exactly do you propose be done with your grandfather's invention? It was the question Caleb had been grappling with since discovering the hidden vault. Looking at the expectant faces around him, he realized his answer would shape not just his future, but potentially that of all Willow Ridge Hollow. My grandfather could have sold this technology for millions, he said thoughtfully. He chose not to because he believed it should benefit everyone, not just enrich a few. I think he'd want it developed here in Willow Ridge Hollow, creating opportunities that don't require destroying the mountain that made it possible. A noble sentiment, Mayor Caldwell interjected, trying to regain control. But the practical realities could be addressed through community partnership, Ms. Harper suggested. The school has grant applications ready for rural technology initiatives. With a working prototype, we'd be strong candidates. Mr. Tate nodded enthusiastically. And my cousin in the state capitol has connections with university engineering programs, always looking for innovative projects. As more townsfolk offered ideas and resources, Caleb felt a growing sense of possibility. The mayor watched with thinly veiled frustration as the momentum shifted decisively away from his mining proposal. Councilwoman Thornton tapped her gavel for attention. I move that we table the condemnation measure pending a full investigation of both the mining safety violations and the potential of this new technology. Further, I suggest we form a community committee to explore development options that include Mr. Morrow's invention. The motion passed unanimously, despite Mayor Caldwell's objections. As the meeting adjourned, townsfolk crowded around the prototype, asking questions and offering congratulations. Nathan stood apart from the celebration. His expression conflicted as he watched his father storm from the hall. You did the right thing, Caleb told him quietly. Nathan nodded slowly. Maybe, but I just upended my entire future. My father won't forgive this easily, Nathan said. Then help build a different future, Caleb suggested, one that doesn't depend on his approval or his mind's. The morning after the town hall meeting, Willow Ridge Hollow buzzed with lively debates. Groups gathered on street corners and in the mercantile, discussing the previous night's revelations. The prototype had sparked imaginations, but practical concerns lingered. Mayor Caldwell supporters stressed the immediate jobs mining provided, while others dreamed aloud of a future powered by Ezra Morrow's invention. Caleb sat with Miss Harper and Mr. Tate at the small cafe near the town square, reviewing the hastily formed community committee's notes. The euphoria of the previous evening had given way to sobering reality. University researchers are interested, Miss Harper said, scanning an email on her tablet. But they want to see the full-scale plans, not just the prototype. Mr. Tate frowned. And the state development grant requires matching funds from the community, funds we don't have. The bell above the cafe door jingled as Nathan entered. Conversations paused briefly as townsfolk noted the mayor's son, their expressions ranging from approval to open hostility. He slid into the booth beside Caleb, his face drawn from lack of sleep. "My father's been on the phone all morning," he reported quietly, calling in favors, making threats. "He's not giving up." "What kind of threats?" Caleb asked, alarmed. "Legal challenges to your inheritance, questions about the technology's safety, pressure on council members with business ties to the mining company." Nathan ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "And he's organizing a town meeting for this afternoon. His own meeting with free lunch provided by the company. Buying support with sandwiches," Mr. Tate scoffed. "It's more than sandwiches," Nathan replied. "He's promising immediate bonuses to all mine employees who attend and support the company's position, and suggesting that opposing his plans could mean layoffs." Miss Harper's expression grew troubled. "That's effective leverage in a town where nearly half the workers depend on those mines." The cafe door opened again, admitting Frank Larson from the hardware store. He approached their table with an apologetic look. "Just wanted you to know," he said to Caleb, "some folks are withdrawing their signatures from our petition. Can't blame them, really. They've got families to feed, mortgages to pay." Outside the window, a small truck drove by with a newly mounted loudspeaker announcing, "Community meeting at the Caldwell Mining Picnic Grounds. Free lunch for all attendees. Come hear the truth about our town's future." Caleb's heart sank. The momentum from last night was slipping away as economic realities reasserted themselves. "We need to show them this isn't just a dream," he said. "We need to demonstrate what the full-scale converter could mean in practical terms." "That would require building it first," Nathan pointed out, "which needs funding, materials, expertise, and time. Time the town might not have if your father accelerates his plans," Mr. Tate added. Miss Harper tapped her pen thoughtfully against her notepad. "We need to put this to a vote, a formal, binding community decision, not just a council recommendation." "My father will still have significant influence," Nathan began. "But at least it will be transparent," she countered. "Everyone's position on record. The communities will clearly expressed." Mr. Tate nodded slowly. "A special referendum could work. Would need council approval, though." Councilwoman Thornton seemed supportive, Caleb said hopefully. "1 vote out of 5, Nathan reminded him. "And my father has close ties with Councilman Parker and Hayes." Their discussion was interrupted by Councilwoman Thornton herself, who entered the cafe with a purposeful stride and headed straight for their table. "Good. You're all here," she said without preamble. "The situation has escalated. Mayor Caldwell has called an emergency council session at 3 o'clock to revisit the condemnation measure." "He can't," Miss Harper protested. "The motion was tabled pending investigation," Councilwoman Thornton explained grimly. "He's claiming new evidence of structural instability and has brought in a county inspector from outside our district with ties to mining interests." Caleb felt the walls closing in. "So he'll get his inspector to declare my property unsafe, the council will vote to condemn it, and everything my grandfather built will be destroyed." "Not if we can prove the property is sound and the technology viable," Thornton replied. "But we need more than the prototype. We need a comprehensive plan showing how this invention could realistically benefit the community by 3 o'clock. "That's impossible," Nathan said incredulously. The councilwoman's expression remained resolute. "Nothing is impossible when a community's future is at stake. Gather all documentation on the full-scale converter. Find evidence of the property's structural integrity." She glanced at Nathan. "And any proof of your father's company creating the instabilities they're now using as justification would be particularly helpful." As she left, the small group exchanged worried glances. The prototype, while impressive, was just a demonstration model. The full-scale converter existed only in Ezra Morrow's plans and notes, not as a working reality. And with the mayor's sway over the council, even a compelling presentation might not suffice. "We need to get back to the vault," Caleb decided. "Gather everything, plans, notes. If we can't build the full converter by this afternoon, we can at least show how it would work and what it means for Willow Ridge." Outside the cafe, a crowd had gathered around the announcement truck, where a company representative handed out flyers touting the economic benefits of expanded mining. Several mine workers in uniform stood nearby, their expressions signaling their stance. As Caleb and the others left the cafe, hostile stares followed. What had seemed a unifying discovery last night had, in the harsh light of day, deepened the town's divisions over its identity and future. "Your father works fast," Caleb muttered to Nathan as they passed a group of miners. "He's fighting for survival," Nathan replied quietly. "If your grandfather's invention becomes reality, it could eventually make the mines obsolete. You can't allow that, even if it means burying something that could help everyone in the long run." Nathan's expression was grim. "My father always says, long-term vision is a luxury for those who control the present." He looked at the divided townsfolk, and right now he's ensuring he keeps that control. The council chamber was packed, every seat filled, with more residents standing along the walls and spilling into the hallway. At the front, Mayor Caldwell sat with the 4 other council members, his confident smile suggesting the outcome was already decided. Beside him, a gray-suited man with a county inspector's badge waited to present his findings. Caleb, Nathan, Miss Harper, and Mr. Tate occupied the front row, surrounded by stacks of Ezra Morrow's plans, notes, and technical diagrams. The prototype sat on a small table before them, humming softly as its blue crystal powered a small array of lights. They had spent the afternoon gathering every piece of evidence they could, but Caleb couldn't shake the feeling it might not be enough. Mayor Caldwell called the meeting to order with 3 sharp raps of his gavel. "This emergency session will address urgent safety concerns regarding the Morrow property following new structural assessments." He nodded to the inspector. "Mr. Daniels, your findings?" The inspector stepped forward, unrolling a large geological survey map. "My examination reveals critical instabilities in the tunnel network beneath the Morrow property. The risk of catastrophic subsidence is significant and immediate. That's because your company created those instabilities with unauthorized blasting," Nathan called out, rising to his feet. The mayor's face tightened. "My son refers to unsubstantiated accusations made last night," Mayor Caldwell said smoothly. "I remind the council that the county mine safety investigation remains ongoing with no official findings issued." "Convenient timing," Mr. Tate muttered. Mayor Caldwell continued, unruffled. "Given these documented safety risks, I move that we proceed with the condemnation measure previously tabled and authorize immediate action to secure the site." Councilman Parker, a longtime ally of the mining company, quickly seconded the motion. "The safety of our community must come first." "Before we vote," Councilwoman Thornton interjected, "Mr. Morrow has prepared information about his grandfather's invention and its potential benefits to our community." The mayor's smile remained fixed. "While we appreciate the boy's enthusiasm for his grandfather's hobby project, this meeting concerns public safety, not theoretical technologies." "It's not theoretical," Caleb insisted, standing. "The prototype works. The full-scale plans are complete. This could transform Willow Ridge Hollow's future." "Into what exactly?" Mayor Caldwell challenged. "A research facility requiring years of development before producing a single job. Meanwhile, my company offers immediate employment, tax revenue, community stability." Caleb faltered. The mayor was right about the timeline. Developing the converter would take years, while the mines employ people now. He glanced at the expectant faces around him, including many miners whose livelihoods depended on Caldwell mining. Before he could respond, the door at the back of the chamber opened. A distinguished older man in an impeccable suit entered, accompanied by Mr. Tate's cousin from the state capitol. The newcomer surveyed the room and strode confidently to the front. "Walter Ellison," he announced, addressing the council. "Ellison, Blackwell & Associates, attorneys at law. I represent the estate of Ezra Morrow." Mayor Caldwell's smile vanished. "This proceeding doesn't require legal representation." On the contrary, Ellison interrupted smoothly. "When a miner's inheritance is threatened, legal representation is not only appropriate, but required." He placed a leather portfolio on the table. "I've been the executor of Ezra Morrow's estate for the past 20 years. managing his considerable assets per his explicit instructions. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Caleb stared at the attorney in confusion. Considerable assets? But my grandfather lived so simply. Ellison smiled kindly at the boy. Your grandfather was many things, Caleb, but poor was not among them. He withdrew a stack of documents from his portfolio. Ezra Morrow held 27 patents for various mechanical and electrical innovations. While he chose not to commercialize his atmospheric energy converter, his earlier inventions were licensed to manufacturing companies worldwide, generating substantial royalties. He handed a document to Caleb. This is a statement of the trust established in your name. The current balance is approximately $8 million, with quarterly royalty payments continuing to accrue. Gasps and exclamations filled the chamber. Caleb stared at the figures in disbelief. All this time, while living in a modest house in town and later in the simple mountain cabin, his grandfather had been wealthy. That's impossible, Mayor Caldwell sputtered. Ezra Morrow lived like a pauper. He lived according to his values, Ellison corrected, choosing simplicity and privacy over ostentation. But he was far from impoverished. The attorney turned to Caleb. Your grandfather stipulated that you were not to be informed of the trust until you had discovered his vault and understood his final invention. He wanted you to appreciate the value of his work, not just its financial rewards. Caleb's mind reeled as he tried to process this revelation. But why didn't he develop the converter himself? With these resources, he could have built it years ago. Because of the second stipulation in his will, Ellison explained, producing another document. The atmospheric energy converter cannot be patented or owned by any individual or corporation. Instead, it must be developed as a community resource with benefits distributed equitably to all residents of Willow Ridge Hollow. He addressed the stunned council members. Ezra Morrow envisioned a research and production facility built on his property, employing local workers and providing clean, affordable energy to the region. His trust allocates substantial funding to establish this facility, contingent upon community participation and support. Ellison continued. Mayor Caldwell had gone pale. This changes nothing about the safety concerns. As to those, Ellison went on, unruffled, I've taken the liberty of commissioning an independent structural assessment from state geological authorities. He distributed copies of a report to each council member. Their findings indicate no natural instabilities in the area. Any recent structural concerns would necessarily result from human activity, such as unauthorized blasting in restricted areas. The mayor's composure cracked. These so-called findings are irrelevant. The council has procedures, protocols, which I'm sure they'll follow diligently. Ellison agreed pleasantly. Just as the state attorney general's office will follow their protocols in investigating potential criminal negligence in mining operations following yesterday's accidents. The implied threat hung in the air. Councilwoman Thornton broke the tense silence. I believe these developments warrant further consideration before any vote on condemnation. I move that we table the mayor's motion and establish a special committee to explore the community development potential of the Morrow invention. Seconded, Councilman Davis said quickly, sensing the shifting tide. Mayor Caldwell looked around desperately but found little support, even from his usual allies. The motion to table passed 4-1, with only the mayor dissenting. As the meeting adjourned in a buzz of excited conversation, Caleb approached Attorney Ellison, still grappling with everything he'd learned. My grandfather had millions, but he let people mock him as a crazy old man living in a cabin. Ellison smiled gently. Your grandfather understood something many never learn. True wealth isn't measured in dollars or public opinion, but in the impact of one's life work. He could have lived lavishly, but chose instead to create something that might change the world. He placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder. He was waiting for you to discover that same truth on your own terms. Nathan joined them, his expression a mix of awe and uncertainty. So what happens now? Caleb looked from the attorney to Miss Harper, Mr. Tate, and the other supporters who had stood by him, then to the wider community, buzzing with talk of possibilities none had imagined days ago. "Now," Caleb said, finding his voice, "we build what my grandfather envisioned. Not just a machine, but a future." 6 months later, Caleb stood on the newly constructed observation deck, extending from what had once been his grandfather's modest cabin. The structure had been preserved and renovated, now serving as both his home and the administrative office for the Morrow Institute for Sustainable Energy. From this vantage point, he could see the entire operation taking shape on the mountainside below. The foundation of the main research facility was complete, with steel framework rising to form what would house laboratories, manufacturing space, and educational areas. Former miners, retrained as construction workers and technicians, moved purposefully across the site. The first full-scale atmospheric energy converter, 3 times the size of the prototype, stood operational nearby, powering the entire construction project. "Quite a change from the worthless cabin everyone mocked you for inheriting," Miss Harper observed, joining him at the railing. Now the Institute's educational director, she had developed programs to train local residents in the technical skills needed for the growing enterprise. "My grandfather would have loved seeing this," Caleb replied, watching a team install the distinctive blue crystal array that formed the converter's heart. The past 6 months had transformed not just the mountainside, but all of Willow Ridge Hollow. The revelation of Ezra Morrow's trust fund and his vision for community development had sparked a renaissance in the valley. While Caldwell Mining continued operations on a reduced scale, many workers had transitioned to positions with the Morrow Institute, finding more stable and safer employment. Mayor Caldwell had resigned 2 months after the council meeting, following the state's investigation into the mining's safety violations. He had left for the city, leaving behind a divided legacy and a mining company now under new management with stricter environmental oversight. "The first residential power connections go live next week," said a familiar voice as Nathan joined them on the deck. After the dramatic council meeting, he had faced a difficult choice between family loyalty and his own principles. Ultimately, he chose to stay in Willow Ridge Hollow, accepting a position as technical liaison between the Morrow Institute and the remaining mining operations. His relationship with his father remained strained, but he had found unexpected purpose in helping integrate the new technology with existing infrastructure. His understanding of both worlds, his father's traditional industry and Caleb's innovative approach, made him uniquely valuable to the transition. 27 homes in the first phase, Nathan continued, consulting his tablet. Mostly elderly residents with the highest energy costs. "The difference in their monthly expenses will be significant, just as my grandfather intended," Caleb said with satisfaction. "Energy that serves people, not profits." Though only 13 now, Caleb had grown immensely in confidence and purpose. With Attorney Ellison's guidance and a board of community trustees, he was learning to manage both his inheritance and his grandfather's legacy. He attended school in the mornings and spent afternoons at the Institute, where his natural aptitude for engineering flourished under the mentorship of university researchers drawn to the revolutionary project. The governor's office confirmed for the ribbon-cutting ceremony next month, Miss Harper noted, and 3 more universities have requested research partnerships. What had begun as one man's solitary vision was evolving into a collaborative endeavor that transcended any single individual. Ezra Morrow had understood this, preparing the way and then stepping aside for others to carry forward. Mr. Tate approached, accompanied by visitors in business attire, representatives from a neighboring community interested in adopting the technology. As Willow Ridge Hollow's economic development coordinator, he had embraced his role as ambassador for the new enterprise. "These folks are from Riverton," he announced. "They heard about our project and wanted to see it firsthand." As Caleb welcomed the visitors and began explaining the technology, he noticed Frank Larson's son among the construction team below. His carpentry business had been one of the first to benefit from the affordable energy provided by the initial converter, allowing him to operate power tools previously too costly to run. Now he divided his time between his growing workshop in town and installing cabinetry in a new facility. Throughout the valley, similar stories of renewal were unfolding. The mercantile had expanded to supply the growing workforce. The cafe had hired additional staff to meet increased demand. Even the school had added specialized technical courses to prepare for future employment needs. Not everything had been smooth. Some residents still resented the disruption to traditional industries. Others worried the changes were happening too quickly. The transition remained challenging for families tied to mining for generations. But the community was finding its way forward together, balancing respect for its past with hope for its future. As evening approached, Caleb excused himself from the visitors and walked to the small memorial garden beside the original cabin. There, a simple stone marker commemorated Ezra Morrow, inscribed with words from his journal. True innovation serves not the innovator, but humanity. Beside the marker stood the original prototype, preserved under glass. The catalyst that had transformed mockery into respect, isolation into community, and a seemingly worthless inheritance into a priceless legacy. Caleb placed a hand on the cool glass, recalling the moment he first turned the key in the cabin's lock, unaware of the treasure waiting to be discovered. His grandfather had left him far more than a dilapidated building or a revolutionary invention. He had bequeathed a purpose, one that would shape not just Caleb's life, but countless others. From somewhere in the valley, a bell told the hour. Lights began to illuminate across the construction site as workers finished their day's efforts. In homes throughout Willow Ridge Hollow, families gathered for evening meals, their conversations inevitably touching on the changes unfolding around them. Changes that had begun with an orphaned boy, a rundown cabin, and the remarkable secret it contained. "Thank you, grandfather," Caleb whispered to the quiet mountainside. "I'll make you proud." As if in answer, the prototype's crystal seemed to pulse briefly with an inner light, a trick of the setting sun, perhaps, or something more. Either way, Caleb smiled, filled with certainty that the legacy he had inherited would continue to grow, bringing light to places that had known too much darkness for too long.